like a big Italian family, big Spanish family.
Yeah.
And her grandmother was kind of the glue that held that all together.
For decades, Richard Gere was Hollywood's untouchable fantasy, the silver-haired gentleman, the man who turned Pretty Woman into a modern fairy tale, the actor who made restraint feel erotic and silence feel louder than words. On screen, he was controlled, elegant, almost unreachable. But at 76 years old, that image finally cracked, because behind the polished smile and perfectly tailored suits, Richard Gere carried a secret he never dared to name out loud. A truth hidden not from the public, but from himself. 5 women, 5 actresses who didn't just share scenes with him. They invaded his emotional space. They disrupted his control. They made him forget where the acting ended and reality began. And when he finally revealed their names, even Hollywood insiders were stunned. Not because of who they were, but because of how deeply they affected him. These were not fleeting crushes. They were emotional earthquakes, and the first woman on his list wasn't chosen for fame. She was chosen because she was the only one who ever made him lose himself completely. Her name was Julia Roberts. Julia Roberts didn't seduce Richard Gere the way Hollywood expects. There was no grand gesture, no scandal, no dramatic confession. Instead, she slipped past his defenses quietly and stayed there. From the very beginning of Pretty Woman, Richard felt something was different. Their chemistry wasn't manufactured by lighting, music, or direction. It existed before the camera ever rolled. Julia had an effortless way of disarming him. She didn't perform emotion. She became it. Richard later admitted that being around her felt dangerous, not because of temptation, but because she made him forget his technique. The moment that sealed it happened during a quiet rehearsal long before filming officially began. They were seated at a small restaurant table, casually blocking a scene, discussing lines without pressure. Then, without warning, Julia reached under the table and slowly traced her fingertip across his palm. Not playful, not accidental, intentional. It was her method, a subtle way to build emotional tension. But to Richard, it landed like a physical shock. He said later, "She did this tiny thing with her fingers, and suddenly it wasn't a scene anymore. It was us." From that moment on, control became impossible. Julia laughed easily, leaned in without thinking, touched his arm mid-sentence, and held eye contact just long enough to make him forget his next line. Crew members noticed. One cameraman later admitted he stopped filming during a take because he felt like he was intruding on something too real. Richard admired her innocence, but also her boldness. She didn't dominate the room. She didn't intimidate. She invited. And that, he said, made her more dangerous than any femme fatale. Even today, Richard Gere admits something startling. If Julia Roberts had ever asked him to disappear for a weekend, he wouldn't have hesitated. He would have gone. Richard Gere still remembers the exact second Sharon Stone entered his life, not the day, not the conversation, the second, because his body reacted before his mind could catch up. There was no formal introduction, no polite Hollywood dance of smiles and small talk. Sharon simply crossed a crowded room toward him, lifted her hand, and with one slow, deliberate motion, brushed a piece of imaginary lint from his shoulder. Then she smiled, not warmly, not shyly, but like a woman who had already decided. That was the moment Richard knew he was in trouble. Later, he described it in a way only he could. Sharon didn't flirt the way normal people flirt. She hunted. And he didn't mean it critically. He meant it with awe. What fascinated him wasn't just her physical presence, it was her precision. Sharon Stone didn't ease into a scene, she claimed it. On set, she could switch from playful laughter with the crew to terrifying focus in a heartbeat. 1 second she was joking, the next she was locked in, eyes sharp, energy coiled. Richard once said working with her felt like stepping into controlled combat. She improvised fearlessly, changed rhythm without warning, cut us straight to emotional truth when others were still warming up. Blink once, Richard admitted, and she'd steal the moment. But that was exactly why he admired her. Sharon didn't wait for permission. She created direction. She challenged the scripts, questioned blocking, stepped closer than planned, slowed scenes when truth demanded it. There was a rehearsal Richard never forgot. Mid-scene, Sharon suddenly grabbed his wrist. It wasn't scripted, it wasn't discussed. She leaned in and whispered, softly but firmly, "Don't act, react." It hit him like electricity. That single line taught him more about presence than years of acting classes ever had. Sharon Stone wasn't just seductive. She was destabilizing. She forced Richard to stay awake emotionally, professionally, instinctively. And that constant alertness, combined with undeniable attraction, made her unforgettable. She didn't make him feel safe. She made him feel alive. And then there was a woman who did the opposite. She didn't ignite him. She pulled him inward, quietly, dangerously. Her name was Diane Lane. What happens when two actors share a connection so intimate that even the director begins to wonder if it's still acting? That question followed Richard Gere and Diane Lane for years. And Richard has never denied why. Diane didn't ignite desire the way Sharon Stone did. She didn't challenge or provoke. She didn't dominate the room. Instead, she drew Richard into her emotional orbit with a softness that felt far more dangerous than heat. Diane Lane listened in a way that made every word land deeper than intended. When she looked at you, she wasn't waiting for her turn to speak. She was absorbing you, studying the spaces between your thoughts. Richard admitted that Diane could shift the emotional temperature of a scene with a single breath. The moment that changed everything came during the filming of Unfaithful. In one rehearsal, Diane was meant to deliver a simple line filled with guilt. The words were ordinary, the emotion was not. Instead of speaking immediately, she slowed down, took a half step closer, placed her forehead gently against Richard's. Then she whispered, barely audible, "Don't answer yet. Let it hurt first." Richard froze. No actress had ever used silence on him like that. This was Diane's power. She didn't act from technique. She acted from wounds, from places people usually protect. Richard later said, "Diane makes you act with your truth, not your talent." For a veteran like him, that was intoxicating and frightening. She held eye contact a second too long, breathed in sync with her partner, adjusted her voice instinctively to match his emotional state. These tiny surgical choices made Richard feel understood in a way he had never expected on a movie set. There was one take no one talks about publicly. Diane's voice cracked. Not scripted, not planned, a real fracture. Instead of cutting, Richard reached for her hand. Diane didn't pull away. She let the vulnerability stay. For a few seconds, there was no script, no characters, just two people standing in something dangerously real. That kind of connection is what Richard Gere has chased his entire career. And it's why Diane Lane holds a place in his memory that even he struggles to explain. But then came a woman who didn't need touch, didn't need closeness, didn't even need words. She disarmed him from across the room. Her name was Michelle Pfeiffer. Richard Gere never expected Michelle Pfeiffer to affect him the way she did, because her power didn't come from heat, it didn't come from flirtation, and it certainly didn't come from touch. It came from something far more unsettling: stillness. The moment Richard fell into that quiet fascination happened during a casting meeting in the late 80s. Michelle walked into the room, sat across from him, folded her hands neatly in her lap, and looked at him. Not politely, not warmly, precisely. 10 full seconds passed, no smile, no small talk, just a gaze so focused it felt like she was reading thoughts he hadn't even admitted to himself. Later, Richard confessed, Michelle didn't have to say a word. I felt like she had already figured me out. No other actress had ever done that to him. Her working style only deepened that effect. Michelle didn't rehearse to memorize lines. She rehearsed to remove anything false. Every gesture was trimmed, every emotion edited down until only truth remained. When she stepped into a scene, she didn't push energy outward. She cut straight through you, calmly, elegantly, almost surgically. There was a test scene Richard never forgot. He tried improvising an emotional beat, adding intensity the way he always had. Michelle didn't respond with a planned reaction. Instead, she inhaled sharply, let a real tremble slip into her voice, then whispered, "Don't lie to me, not here." It wasn't in the script, but it landed harder than any intimate gesture ever had. Richard loved her discipline, her restraint, the way her stillness made every micro-expression feel enormous. He once said, privately, with Michelle, you don't chase her body, you chase her depth. And that kind of desire doesn't fade, it lingers, it follows you. But the final woman on Richard Gere's list wasn't there because of danger, or chemistry, or moments stolen between takes. She was there because she made him feel something he hadn't felt since he was a boy. Awe. Her name was Sophia Loren. Richard Gere didn't place Sophia Loren on his list because of chemistry. Not because of danger, not because of stolen moments behind closed doors. He placed her there because she awakened something far older inside him, a feeling he hadn't experienced since childhood. The moment that sealed his fixation happened long before they ever shared a frame or exchanged a professional word. It was at a European award ceremony in the late 80s. The room was full of stars, powerful people, familiar faces, and then Sophia Loren walked toward him. She moved with an effortless Italian grace that seemed untouched by time. As she reached him, she lifted her hand, placed her palm gently against his cheek, softly, almost motherly, and said, "You look too serious for a man with eyes like that." Richard couldn't speak. He laughed about it years later, but in that instant he was frozen. A 40-something Hollywood icon suddenly reduced to a nervous teenager standing in front of a living legend. But what made his admiration irreversible wasn't that touch. It was the way Sophia worked. She never forced a scene, never chased attention, never raised her voice to claim a space. Instead, she commanded a stillness. During a master class they both attended, Sophia spoke to younger actors with quiet authority. She said, "If you don't live with your heart open, the camera will know." Richard never forgot that line. He later admitted it changed how he approached vulnerability on the screen. From that moment on, he stopped trying to show emotion and started allowing it to exist. Sophia's presence, he said, felt like gravity. She made him want to rise higher, stand a straighter, bring more honesty into every performance. And then Richard confessed something that surprised even himself. "I never desired Sophia the way I desired others," he said privately. "I desired to be worthy of her." And that, more than chemistry, danger, or passion, is why she remains the dream he never escaped. So now, at 76, Richard Gere has finally named the 5 actresses who mattered most. Not the most famous, not the most beautiful, but the ones who reached him where acting ends and truth begins. Julia Roberts, Sharon Stone, Diane Lane, Michelle Pfeiffer, Sophia Loren, 5 women, 5 different kinds of power. Now the question is yours. Which name shocked you the most? And do you think any of these feelings were ever truly mutual? Tell us in the comments. And if you want more deep dives into Hollywood's hidden emotions and untold stories, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because some legends only reveal the truth when it's finally too late to hide it.